Ahoy there, mates. Hello, friends. Welcome aboard the VHS pirate ship, and welcome to Reek of the Week, the little show here on the VHS pirate ship where I take a look at some 80s and 90s nostalgia. Yes, it's the show that has the sweet stench of childhood memories and reeks of nostalgia. It's the show you can smell. It's Reek of the Week. And today, we're going to take a look at some more movie-based cartoons. That's animated children's cartoons based on live-action movies. And this episode is a follow-up episode to a previous Reek of the Week episode, movie-based cartoons. And if you haven't checked that episode out yet, I encourage you to do so. The link will be in the description. In that episode, I discussed stuff like the Back to the Future cartoon, the Teen Wolf cartoon, the Bill and Ted cartoon, as well as many others. But there were plenty other movie-based cartoons that I did not discuss, be it through time constraints or the fact that I just sort of forgot. Mostly the latter. And there was a movie-based cartoon that I did not discuss in that episode for neither of those reasons, basically because I'd already talked about it in another completely unrelated video. However, I now believe it's worth further discussion, and that is Police Academy, which first aired on CBS September of 1988 and ran till September of 1989, lasted 2 seasons with a grand total of 65 episodes. And the opening theme song, They Wear the Blue, was provided and performed by the Fat Boys. So that's pretty interesting. I'm sure we all forgot about that. Hell, I'm not even sure if I even ever knew that. Now, in the first movie-based cartoons episode, I discussed how this is one of those films that it's weird that they had a kids cartoon based on it. Mainly because Police Academy, the first movie, is certainly not a kids movie. I mean, your kids could watch it, but you'd probably have to cover their eyes for certain parts, you know, one of those kind of movies, because there's boobies in it and naked ladies. And not to mention the famous podium scene. Yeah, that's an awkward conversation when your kid asks you what's going on there. What's he doing, Mom? Oh, he's just really happy. It's like a fun tickle. I actually did have a friend that had to explain this scene to their kid, and I think he explained it as, oh, he just hit his funny bone. So, that's not bad. But the really lewd and lascivious stuff is only in the first movie. The rest of the films in the immense Police Academy saga really aren't that bad. In fact, they're not bad at all. They're family-friendly comedies, and they were a lot of fun, and kids dug them. I know I watched these shits out of Police Academy 3 when I was a kid. And this cartoon, of course, being a cartoon, was directly marketed to kids. And boy, oh boy, did they market this. The toy company Kenner had a pretty expansive and intricate toy line for this, and they even did a cadet headquarters playset for this, which looks strangely familiar to the real Ghostbusters Firehouse playset. They probably just used the same mold and added some stuff to it. Kenner would do that kind of stuff. Remember what they did to the Ewok Village playset for Return of the Jedi? They just repackaged it for the Sherwood Forest playset for the Prince of Thieves toy line they did. We see what you did there. Oh, heck, a lot of toy companies did this sort of thing. It's a cost-saving measure, and I totally understand. And Kenner even had some pretty clever role-playing toys for this. Handcuffs. Get it? Hey, that's pretty neat and pretty original. And there were sticker books and coloring books and even a board game. Yes, they certainly pushed this to kids, which is a little strange, even though the cartoon is clearly based on the latter movies. But those latter movies stem from the first movie, which kids probably should not watch. But I gotta tell you, that's still better than having a cartoon show based on RoboCop. Yep, and I'm sure you already know this, they made a cartoon based on RoboCop, which first aired October of 1988 and ran until December of that same year with a total of 12 episodes. And this is based on the 1987 film RoboCop. I mean, of course, if you didn't know that, just go ahead and just plunge yourself off a cliff. Well, perhaps it's more accurate to say it's sort of loosely based on the film and, well, kind of stems from it. See, this cartoon is mainly based on the Marvel Comics version of RoboCop. Okay, so don't plunge yourself off a cliff. You shouldn't do that anyway. Marvel Comics had obtained the publishing rights to RoboCop from Orion Pictures. And there were a slew of Marvel comic books about RoboCop. And those said comic books, while still being violent and all, were nowhere near as violent as the original film. Because, man, I tell you, RoboCop as a film, yeah, it's R-rated, but that is a hard R. Every minute of that film is violent. And kids should not watch it, even though they totally did. I remember my friends telling me about it at school. And since the Marvel Comics version of RoboCop, which is what this cartoon is actually based on, really wasn't all that well known at the time, people just assumed this cartoon was based on the movie. Well, I suppose I should say that the comic books were sort of well known, but the movie was just way more recognizable. So that's really where all the automatic assumption comes in, and when people heard that there was a cartoon show, a kids cartoon show based on RoboCop, people sort of had a little bit of a problem with that. And rightfully so, because it is sort of weird and wildly inappropriate that there's a kids cartoon about RoboCop one of the most violent films of the 80s. At least at face value, because if you do some digging, you'll find out that there were wheels in motion that none of us ever knew about. Well, maybe you knew about it, but I sure as heck didn't. You see, apparently the RoboCop cartoon was supposed to tie in with the film RoboCop 2, which originally was supposed to be PG rated in an entirely different film than the one we got. Can you imagine that? A PG rated RoboCop 2? I mean, even the abysmal family-friendly RoboCop 3 was PG-13, but they realized how marketable RoboCop was, and they wanted to make the character more kid-friendly. And the cartoon was supposed to coincide with the release of RoboCop 2, which, like I said, was supposed to be a kinder, gentler RoboCop. However, once the cartoon was almost finished, there was a writer's strike, and the original writers for RoboCop 2 hit the road. So the producers had to punt, and they got Frank Miller. Yes, the Frank Miller. And he would write them a PG RoboCop, but the producers just didn't like it. Maybe they just didn't like the whole PG-rated RoboCop thing, but a draft of that version from Frank Miller would eventually evolve into the screenplay for RoboCop 3. But for RoboCop 2, they went with the R-rated, and I mean R-rated version that Frank Miller wrote. And that's the one we know and love today. It's highly inappropriate for kids, just like the first movie was. And RoboCop 2's production was supposed to be finished by 1988 to be released with the cartoon, but that didn't happen, and RoboCop 2's release was pushed to 1990. Despite all these problems, the cartoon was still released for syndication in 1988 and was part of Marvel's Action Universe and played right alongside the Dino Riders and Spider-Man and his amazing friends. Yes, there was a time when you could plop down in front of the television and watch a rock block of Dino Riders, Spider-Man, and RoboCop. Man, the 80s were a great time. Now, like I had mentioned, the RoboCop cartoon was based more on the Marvel Comics version of RoboCop and ventured into some alternate timeline kind of stuff, wherein it didn't really follow the events of the movie because Clarence Boddicker shows up in this. And of course, he's RoboCop's nemesis in the film, and he dies. Yeah, spoiler alert. And that concept's really weird because if the cartoon was trying to distance itself from the R-rated movie, then why would you include characters from the R-rated movie? Oh well, what are you gonna do? So their original plan to make RoboCop a kid-friendly, marketable asset really didn't come to fruition as well as they'd hoped. But that did not stop them from making a toy line. RoboCop and the Ultra Police was released by Kenner in 1990, and it has been said that this toy line did not sell very well because of its poor design. Hi, kids. And I'm sure it also had a lot to do with the fact that parents did not want to buy their kids toys that were based on R-rated movies. Oh, sure, we know now that this stuff was based on the cartoon, which was based on the comic book, which was not necessarily based on the movie, but at that time, the general consensus was RoboCop was an R-rated franchise, and it's weird to market that to kids. And this is not the only example of this. They also did the same thing with Rambo. Yep, Rambo, the Force of Freedom, first hit the airwaves September 1986 and ran to December 26th of that same year. Now, it seems that the character of Rambo as a marketable asset really stems from the second movie, Rambo: First Blood Part 2, because that marketability certainly is not based on the first film. Yes, we were all introduced to John Rambo in the film First Blood, which is an entirely different kind of movie than the rest of the films in the Rambo series, which are straight-up action-adventure movies that turn John Rambo into a marketable action hero. So they went with an entirely different direction for the character of John Rambo than what they began with. Bingo, bongo, Rambo goes from a guy suffering from PSD to a marketable action hero. And suddenly there's a Rambo cartoon, Rambo toys, Rambo lunchboxes, Rambo water guns, Rambo pencil erasers, and even a Rambo train set. And let's not forget the Rambo Big Wheel, or rather Rambo Power Cycle. Rambo, the Force of Freedom, was a cartoon that really shouldn't be downplayed. Even though it is weird they made a cartoon for Rambo, it was still pretty cool. There were a total of 65 action-packed episodes and included the voice talents of James Avery, Frank Welker, and Peter Cullen, so that's pretty awesome. So it seems that the thing to do back then was to take R-rated franchises and turn them into kids' cartoons. Hey, why not? The absolute best example of this is Toxic Crusaders, the kids' cartoon based on the Toxic Avenger. But I had already talked about that in the first Week of the Week episode about movie-based cartoons. But in hindsight, perhaps I should have saved that for this episode, because it seems like I'm talking about inappropriate movies that were made into kids' cartoons. It does not just seem like it, because I totally am. But I should say, and as a viewer had astutely pointed out, Toxic Crusaders was an answer back to the cartoon Captain Planet, which was all about raising awareness and solving environmental concerns. And Toxic Crusaders did the same thing in its own little way. Man, I tell ya, I remember when all it took was an owl in Lederhosen to tell us not to pollute. Wait, that's not Lederhosen. Could have swore it was Lederhosen. The 90s would have its fair share of kids' cartoons based on R-rated franchises. Because not only would we have Toxic Crusaders, but we would also have Tales from the CryptKeeper, which first aired in September of 1993 and ran all the way until December of 1999. For a television show, especially a cartoon, that's like forever. So that lasted a pretty long time. And of course, this is based on Tales from the Crypt, the live-action horror show that played on HBO from 1989 to 1996. And there's a bit of a technicality here because Tales from the Crypt isn't technically a movie, but since they were all like long episodes, it's sort of like all little mini movies, so I'm going to count it. And this was all R-rated stuff here, so of course they made a cartoon about it. So all the kids that were too young to watch Tales from the Crypt ended up watching this. Hey, everyone likes horror to some degree, even kids do. And of course, this show was pretty mild in comparison to the show it's based on. I mean, imagine if R.L. Stine wrote episodes of Tales from the Crypt. It's like that. It was a pretty neat show, and a pretty good way to market an R-rated franchise to kids that weren't allowed to watch the product. And they even had Tales from the CryptKeeper action figures. And even Tales from the Crypt itself had toys with these talking CryptKeeper dolls. Hey, look at that one. He must be going on vacation. Well, I tell you what, I did plan on talking about a few more movie-based cartoons, but I'm out of time. Yeah, I really wasn't expecting the RoboCop cartoon to have such an extensive history. So I'm going to make this a 3-parter and continue the movie-based cartoon saga with even more movie-based cartoons. So be on the lookout for that one and be sure to check out the first Week of the Week movie-based cartoons episode. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate you joining me for this installment of Week of the Week. Take care out there. Be sure to hit subscribe and keep it locked right here, only on Captain Adam's VHS Pirate Ship. Goodbye and God bless.